Continuing on with Augustus's reign, here we are with this map again. Of course, the pink areas were, of course, client kingdoms of Rome, meaning that they paid tribute to Rome in some kind of way. And then we have Parthia over here, which was an enemy of Rome. Okay, so that is this white area here. But again, there were 4 legions, 4 of them placed in this area here, in this borderland of Syria and Jerusalem, to make sure that if Parthia ever acted up, that they would be able to defend the border. We also have Dacia, an area here, which we'll talk about in later lectures, and then also Germania, where 3 of the legions during the Teutoburg Wall were lost in this area over here. And so, yeah, as you can see, kind of the Danube River kind of running along here is a very good border for Rome, and then we've got the Rhine River down here. Okay, moving on. So, also during Augustus's reign, an interesting thing happens historically. However, this was not known back then at the time, okay? And so this is something that historians have done based on, first, originally a religious kind of change, and religious dating calendar. But we today use a calendar that says the words, counting correctly, right? Correct. So this year is 2020, next year would be 2021, right? And so we are in the current era. Well, we've been talking for this entire course about BCE and talking dating numbers backwards, right? Okay? And so we've been from the year, 2000, if not even way before that, with the Sumerians and Egyptians, to the 1500s, to the thousands, and now in the Roman period, we've been in the 500s, and started in the 700s. During Alexander the Great, we were in the 300s, and now in the Roman period, under Augustus, he starts taking over as emperor in the year 27 BCE, and he continues on until the year 14 CE, which means he straddles 2 different time periods, right? Before Christ, or as historians use, before Common Era, or before Current Era. And, of course, today we are in Anno Domini, or AD, or more correctly from a historical standpoint, Common Era or Current Era, okay? And we count correctly. There is no year 0. The year goes directly from 1 BCE on calendars to the year 1 CE. Okay, or 1 AD on this case, if you want to go with the religious version, okay? But for this course, 1 CE. And so now in the class, we're going to be counting forwards, as normal, okay? So if you were confused beforehand with the years counting backwards, don't worry about it anymore, or not as much anymore, right? You can now start thinking correctly with your brains on this going forward, okay? I know many people struggle with it, with the how counting backwards thing. And during this period of time, and one of the reasons that this ends up happening is originally, the religious calendar, when it was created, thought that Jesus was born here, right here. Well, there is a figure named Jesus, okay, that there is a historical record of a man named Jesus, okay, and of course religion, the Christian religion, regards him in high quality and everything like that as being the Messiah, and being capable of miracles and being God's son. That is a discussion for a religion class, not a historical one, okay? And so we won't really talk about that. However, we will talk about him very briefly for the historical purposes. We actually know from historical dating systems, he was born sometime during the spring or summer, not Christmas, in the year 7 BCE or up to the year 2 BCE, somewhere between 7 and 2 BCE, sometime again during the spring or summer, based on a couple astrological things that happened that we know, or astronomy-based things, with the stars and everything that's mentioned. So, not the winter. We do know definitely not winter. And so sometime between 30 and 35 CE, the Jewish people start demanding that this person, Jesus, who started claiming that he was the Messiah, or being claimed that he was the Messiah by others, demand that Jesus be crucified in Jerusalem by the Roman government. And that is because the Roman government was in charge of Syria, which, if we go back right here, this area right here, Judea or Syria. And so the governor of the Roman province there, of Judea was what it was named then, was Pontius Pilate, a man named Pontius Pilate, who is actually in the Bible and things like that as well, during the and so he is brought up by the Jewish people and demanded by them through petition that he quell the problem that this person is calling himself the Messiah. And so Pontius Pilate reluctantly oversees the trial that the Jewish people do. And he also reluctantly agrees to crucifixion when the people in charge of the trial basically find Jesus guilty of sacrilege, okay, claiming that he's the Messiah. And so Pontius Pilate allows the crucifixion to happen. And again, crucifixion was a common crime or death sentence for people during the Roman Empire, okay, and Roman Republic beforehand. So this isn't kind of new. And this incident itself is actually very minor in the Roman Empire as a whole. It makes a little bit of history records over in those provinces that last today, but the rest of the empire wouldn't have known about this. They probably heard about other people being claimed that they could do miracles and things like that. And claiming, if they weren't claiming that they were an oracle and being able to tell the future, then maybe they were capable of some other kind of miracle. And so that kind of thing happened a lot. But it is uncertain whether any of those miracles or things were actually true or not. And again, that is a faith issue, for people to discuss in a religion class, okay? Not in a historical class. But we do know from record that there was a man named Jesus, and that during this period, sometime between 30 to 35 CE, during the current era, he was crucified after a trial in Judea, in Jerusalem. And that was during the reign of Tiberius, which came after Augustus. But he would have been born during Augustus's reign and died during Tiberius's reign. So let's talk a little bit about how we get from Augustus to Tiberius first. So, succession of Augustus. When Augustus starts getting to his 50s to 60 years old period, and he's been ruling for about 30 years at this point, he starts really worrying about having a successor. Okay, and wanting someone to take over for him in the empire and being the next emperor. And of course he realizes right away that his only true offspring that's survived to adulthood is his daughter Julia. And that's not going to work because back then women were subservient to men, okay? And were kind of second class compared to men. Well, so he can't be his daughter. But maybe it can be someone that his daughter marries or has a child with. And so that was the idea. And so he married Julia several times to several of his political allies, including his best friend and general for all of his battles against Sextus Pompey, as well as against Marcus Antonius, or Mark Antony rather, and Cleopatra. And that man was Marcus Agrippa. So Julia was married to Marcus Agrippa. And she absolutely hated that. And she absolutely hated her later marriages after Marcus Agrippa's death. Marcus Agrippa was, of course, as old as her father, and she did not like being married to someone that old. She also didn't get to pick that marriage. She was forced into that marriage. It was an arranged marriage. And so Julia was married several times, not just to Marcus Agrippa, but to other people, and she was always unfaithful and had multiple affairs, as well as just found partners to flirt with and have relations with, because she just wanted to lash out at Augustus and her husbands that she really had no say in. However, the marriage to Marcus Agrippa did result in a grandson for Augustus himself, okay? So a child of Marcus Agrippa and Julia. And that son was Agrippa Postumus, the son of Julia and Marcus Agrippa, obviously. And he's named Agrippa Postumus in honor of his father. However, Marcus Agrippa, after Julia became pregnant, went off to go fight on the border of this area, Dalmatia, and against Dacians and the Dalmatian area, okay, and reinforce it with a legion here. And while he was gone, he actually dies on campaign from natural causes, not war-related, okay? He was quite old at the time. And so Agrippa dies. However, the son is born a few months later, Agrippa, is his name, and he eventually becomes, or immediately becomes, for his middle name, Agrippa Postumus. Okay, Agrippa Postumus. Posthumous, as in because his father is already dead. This was a common thing, that Postumus was a name given to a child when their father was already dead before that person was born. However, Augustus starts looking at Agrippa Postumus as a child and starts going, yes, perfect, I've got an heir for the future. However, Agrippa Postumus grows up kind of crazy. And by kind of crazy, I mean pretty crazy, because he goes around yelling, not only as a child, but as an adult, okay, specifically during his adult years, that he was the god of the sea, Neptune. That he was not actually Agrippa Postumus, that he was actually Neptune the god. And this was not like being a child and playing or anything like this. He was actually doing it as an adult. He was flat out crazy. And so had obviously some kind of mental illness or some kind of other issue. And so Augustus immediately realizes that is not going to work for my successor. So he starts looking other places. Well, luckily, he was already married to another woman. Augustus was, that is. Augustus actually, when he became married to this other woman, adopted both of her children. She was married to a previous husband and had two young boys, two brothers, to the two brothers of her, two sons of her, right? The brothers of each other. And one of these brothers was a man named Tiberius. And Augustus adopted Tiberius as well as Tiberius's brother very early on and raised them as his own children. Eventually, Tiberius's brother dies, and so Augustus is kind of left to looking at only Tiberius as the next heir. And so starts realizing he needs to start grooming him as quickly as possible to make him in leadership qualities. Luckily, Tiberius was up to that challenge and was actually very good at commanding not only the legions, but also working out political issues and things like that. He was brought to the Senate multiple times. He was made a consul as well as a senator. He was also made into a general of the legions, and he became very respected. And during the last few years, during Augustus's years in his 70s, late 60s to 70s, Tiberius is actually made regent, meaning that he's basically doing the day-to-day jobs for Augustus, because Augustus was a little bit too old at that time. Finally, in the year 14 CE, 14 current era, right before his 77th birthday, a month shy of it, during his 44th year as emperor, Augustus dies. Augustus dies from probably heart issues or some other sort of old age issues. We know that he dies peacefully. It is not a painful death or anything. And of course, Augustus is now dead. And who is going to be the new emperor? Obviously, Tiberius. The month in which Augustus died is actually renamed by the Romans to the month of August. Named in direct honor of his name. And so it is actually named to honor him. So anytime we go to the month of August, you can think of him, Octavian, Augustus, same guy. And so moving on, let's talk a little bit about Tiberius's reign. So Tiberius is actually going to be the first of the Julio-Claudian emperors, okay? The Julio-Claudians are a dynasty, a family of 4 emperors, one after the other, okay? And they all happen to be related to each other and related via adoption to Augustus, okay? And through a few other family ties that way to Augustus, but mostly through adoption. And so the Julio-Claudians are the names of the 2 families that merged, the Claudians being Tiberius's original family from his father, and then because his father died, Augustus of the Julio family, because of Julius Caesar, right? The Julio family. Eventually, Augustus married the Claudian mother of Tiberius, and so Julio-Claudian is the name of the family, okay, and the name of the dynasty. Tiberius is, of course, the first of these 4 emperors. We will also talk about Gaius, Claudius, and Nero after Tiberius's death. And so let's talk a little bit about Tiberius's reign. He, of course, was born in the year 42 BCE, and he died in the year 37 CE, so about 70-something years old, almost 80. He was emperor from the year 14 CE to the year 37 CE when he died. Again, right after Augustus died in the year 14, he became emperor. And to become emperor, you had to get the approval of 3 groups. The first was the Senate. They had to say, yes, we're going to agree to you being the emperor. The second was the army, which, again, pretty important. If the army isn't going to be with you, maybe one of those army commanders might want to try to take over, right? And so you need the respect of the army. And the third is the Praetorian Guard, which at the time wasn't too big, but it slowly starts getting bigger and bigger, especially under Tiberius's reign. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And so, to be emperor, you had to have respect of those 3 groups and approval of those 3 groups, unofficially or officially. And luckily, because of Tiberius being regent under Augustus, and all this experience of being a consul, the regent, commanding armies, provincial governorships, that he had been in charge of provinces for a little while as an adult and sent off to be in charge of them, he had the experience. And so the Senate, the army, and the Praetorian Guard all were like, yeah, this guy is qualified to be emperor. Okay? However, Tiberius was relatively perverted in his private life. He did have many sexual relations with young children, particularly young boys, including Gaius, his nephew, which, yes, is this same Gaius here, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on when we get to him. And so Gaius was one of these people or young boys that Tiberius basically raped and forced into sexual things. The empire is very peaceful during this time. However, the Senate, after he starts kind of being approved by the Senate originally, really starts to hate him, because he starts kind of not listening to the Senate. They figured, oh, we'll approve him and then he'll listen to us. No. He kind of picks up where his adopted father, Augustus, left off, with kind of only going to the Senate for minor things, and to make sure to just basically rubber stamp things. And so the Senate really hates him. Eventually, Tiberius has a son named Drusus, from a marriage that he is married when he gets married. And of course, Drusus is going to be his heir, or heir apparent, right? However, Drusus dies in the year 23 CE, probably from poisoning, because he becomes mysteriously ill, and it is very unlikely that it was a normal sickness, because the vomit and stuff has a very weird color to it. It's kind of yellowish, sometimes greenish, and so it's kind of, and it's described as green and yellow slime coming up from him. And it's very odd that that happened, because it seemed that possibly someone else had poisoned him, because everyone knew that Tiberius was wanting his son Drusus to take over. However, Drusus dies from poisoning, probably, in the year 23 CE, and so Tiberius has to start deciding who is he going to name as his heir next. Well, he doesn't exactly do that yet. However, when he starts hearing rumors that that illness that his son died from wasn't a regular illness, that it was probably poisoned, he starts kind of getting very paranoid at this time. And it was probably some kind of mental illness that Tiberius had, or just, especially when he started growing older in age, that he started getting very, very paranoid that people were out to get him. And he's emperor, so maybe people are. And obviously they were out to get his son. Well, eventually, the paranoia begins to set in, especially when Tiberius gets much older, and eventually, in the year 26 to 27 CE, he starts realizing that he really doesn't want to be in Rome, because there are too many possible threats, such as from the Senate or other people in Rome that might want to kill him. And so eventually he puts in charge Sejanus, or Sejanus, whatever you want to pronounce it as. Sejanus, the head of the Praetorian Guard. As the new Praetorian Guard leader, he nominates this one Praetorian soldier that he's got to know, and he decides that Sejanus, or Sejanus, is the best person to basically kind of take over if Tiberius was gone for any reason. And so at that point, Sejanus starts actually feeding into Tiberius's paranoia. Sejanus starts becoming very apt in realizing, oh, I can use crazy Tiberius's paranoia kind of ideas and worrying about people out to get him and feed into it by saying, yes, people are out to get you and I can protect you. And that would be a way to manipulate Tiberius. And so Sejanus actually goes into it full on. At this point, the Praetorian Guard under Sejanus, because he's the leader of the Praetorian Guard, is 9,000 soldiers strong. It's size of 2 legions put together almost. And it's all based in the city of Rome. All 9,000 of them are in the city of Rome, policing the streets daily, guarding the palace, etc. And there was a movie made, or a movie TV series, 14-part miniseries, where Patrick Stewart, Jean-Luc Picard from Star Trek, was actually the actor picked to play Sejanus. So that's why this picture's here. I always think it's kind of funny. Because he's got hair, and he's typically always shown as bald, right? Or Professor X from the X-Men movies, okay? So here you are, that's why he's there. Well, eventually, Sejanus plays into the paranoia of poor Tiberius enough that Tiberius ends up deciding that he is going to leave the city of Rome in the year 26 CE and actually flee to the small little island in the Mediterranean Sea, in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, named Capri. And Capri is this beautiful Mediterranean Sea island where there's a beautiful villa for him waiting, and he decides to retire there and leaves Sejanus in Rome as regent. Well, Sejanus gets what he wanted all along, full basically power as not quite emperor but as regent, and he gets to do all the day-to-day stuff. And so Sejanus starts immediately, with Tiberius being gone, abusing power and begins a reign of terror. A reign of terror actually begins during him. He starts having people that inform on him, using that same kind of secret police that Augustus had set up to start finding out if anyone was against Sejanus, or even speaking out against Tiberius and the empire in general, he would have killed. And so executions were almost a daily occurrence for years. About 4 to 5 years, there were daily executions almost of enemies of Sejanus, as well as enemies of potentially Tiberius, are accused of being crimes and being executed. And so after about 4 or 5 years of doing this, people in Rome start writing letters to Capri, hoping that Tiberius will read them. And most of them are intercepted by Sejanus's Praetorian Guard and Sejanus's informant police and secret police. However, eventually, a couple of these letters do finally reach Tiberius and tell him what is going on in the year 31 CE, about 4 to 5 years later. Tiberius learns of what Sejanus is doing, and learns also that Sejanus is basically calling himself emperor, without necessarily saying that, in Rome. And so Tiberius decides, okay, well, that's enough of Sejanus, I can't trust him anymore, time to kill him, or time to get rid of him. And so he sends a letter to the second in command of the Praetorian Guard, a man named Macro, or a soldier named Macro. And so this letter tells Macro from Tiberius that Macro is now in charge of the Praetorian Guard, and that he is to summon Sejanus to the Senate. But first, Macro needs to go and tell the Senate that Tiberius has some changes in store. And so Macro takes this letter, and has several other letters with it, all from Tiberius, and goes to the Senate and tells the Senate what is going on. Eventually, the Senate and Macro ask for Sejanus to come and meet with them. Sejanus is led to believe during this meeting and this invitation that he is going to get even more power from Tiberius in this letter. Well, Sejanus gets there and is kind of feeling very kind of inspired and kind of very full of himself, like, oh, I'm going to be, named as the next heir of the empire when Tiberius is dead, because Tiberius is extremely old at this point. About 70 at this time, and so Sejanus is really expecting to be named as heir, fully as the new emperor. And Macro starts reading the decree to the Senate, and it says that Sejanus is not only not going to be the next emperor, but he is an outlaw of Rome, he is to be sentenced to death immediately and to be executed. And so a bunch of Macro's loyal Praetorians jump on Sejanus and stab him in the Senate building and actually toss him down the stairs of the Senate building into the Roman crowd. The Roman crowd, who absolutely hated Sejanus because they feared for their lives during this reign of terror for the past 4 to 5 years, literally grab Sejanus's body and rip him limb from limb. Like, they run around with his arms and legs and his head, kind of ripping from limb. Macro, at that point, now because of that letter and decree from Tiberius, has now loyal authority from Tiberius to go and hunt down every single member of Sejanus' family, all of his friends, and all of his political allies. And any of the Praetorian Guard that are swearing not loyalty to Macro and Tiberius, but swearing loyalty to Sejanus, which were quite a few. And so there's kind of bloodbath and fighting in the streets between Macro's Praetorians, which are loyal to Tiberius, and against Sejanus's ones. Eventually, Tiberius, pictured here, comes back from his villa on Capri, which obviously beautiful place, right? That's why he was living there. Comes back from Capri to Rome and finally starts running things from Rome again for a little while. However, in the year 37 CE, at 78 years old, he dies. Well, it's reported that he dies. And in fact, by then he had already named his nephew, really his closest family member, and his one-time lover when Gaius was a young boy, as the heir to be the next emperor. So Gaius will be the next emperor. However, when Gaius learns of Tiberius's death, Gaius starts celebrating and going, yes, I'm emperor, I'm emperor, I'm emperor, and starts basically throwing a party. However, then another member of one of Tiberius's doctors comes during the party and says, Gaius, he's not actually quite dead yet. He's still alive. He's just barely breathing. Gaius then visits his uncle, Tiberius, on his deathbed, and we are not exactly sure what happens next, but it is likely believed that he either poisoned him or smothered him with a pillow, and Tiberius dies almost immediately after this visit, or during this visit with Gaius. Regardless, Gaius is still named as the emperor. And so, let's talk a little bit about Gaius right here. Gaius, of course, gets immediate response from both the Senate, the Praetorian Guard, and the army as being the next emperor. They all say yes. Tiberius had said you are going to be emperor, and so we basically will go ahead and follow through on that. They didn't realize that Caligula, as he becomes known as, and we'll talk about that in a minute, Gaius was quite crazy on his own right. Not the paranoia that Tiberius was, or the perverted ideas that Tiberius had, but his own kind of crazy, and we'll talk about that in a moment. He was born in the year 12 CE, and he would live until the year 41 CE, so not a very long life. Of course, he becomes emperor in the year 37 CE, and he will only be emperor for only a short time, 37 to 41, only a few years. But during that time, it is quite an interesting time. So let's talk a little bit about his childhood. Originally, during his childhood, he was born out on military campaign, or possibly in Rome, and then immediately sent out on military campaign with his father and, of course, his mother. And he a very small child, as a young toddler, he was actually dressed up as a young little legionnaire by the troops and his father in a little uniform, a little military uniform. And the Legion actually ran around with him as his mascot. Kind of like a mascot of a football team, but mascot of the regiment, the Legion. And they used to nickname him Caligula. Caligula is Latin for little boots, because he would have little tiny boots on in his military uniform. He probably looked adorable, right? But not really. Because eventually, Little Boots, or Caligula, kind of grew up with a bit of an ego because of being treated very well by the legions. And so, let's talk a little bit more about Caligula and his reign during the next video, because it's an interesting one.